All right, what is going on, Optimistic Fan Club? Welcome back. It is a new week. Pumping out a ton of stuff. Glad everyone is back. We got some big things to talk about today. Deion Sanders has officially made his first statements regarding the Shedeur Sanders draft fall, all the talk that was going on. We're going to dive into that. We're going to dive into Jason McIntyre, Colin Hurd's lackey's response to that, and dig into that. We're going to talk about the Browns being ranked with the 32nd best roster, the worst roster in the league by PFF. That is pretty wild. So we're going to dive into that. And then Zac Jackson, the athletic journalist for the Cleveland Browns, talking about Dillon Gabriel not looking like an NFL quarterback and maybe some other general NFL things. But here we go. Let's do this thing. Whew. Thank you again for tuning in. Let's dive right into it. So Deion Sanders was on Asante Samuel's podcast. If you watch that whole thing, I tried to listen to the entire thing to get the full context of what Deion was saying, just to make sure that I wasn't getting anything mixed up with the clip that was reposted to Twitter. However, most of that conversation was Asante Samuel trying to get Deion to admit that he was a great corner and that he was extremely talented. Because I think back a few months ago or whatnot, like Asante Samuel's always firing off on Twitter, talking about like how disrespected he is, how great of a corner he was, how many interceptions he got in his career, and how when you break down the numbers, 1 in every 5 times he was thrown at, he got a pick. It's like really weird. Obviously, Asante Samuel's a great player. His son is turning out to be a pretty solid player himself. But it was just a very odd dynamic. And Deion seemed all game for it. He was very gracious with it all. And it seemed like they squashed some beef. But regardless, the Shedeur portion, still trying to get the name right. So thank you for bearing with me here, people. Was very, very small. It was almost just in passing. And I think that is probably, if Asante Samuel is listening, it's probably what's hurting your pod a little bit there. You only got 12,000 subscribers, which is very insignificant for a guy who was a great player in the NFL. Probably spend less time trying to convince other people how great you were. Be confident in your career numbers. And let's talk about some more interesting topics than how good you are and why Deion needs to admit it. That is besides the fact. But we're going to play the clip now. This is what was said in case you missed it, and bear with me. We're going to try and make sure the volume's all good here. This is about 30 seconds.
We've always been in front of the camera, so they know how to navigate. They know how to handle themselves. Yeah. And you're not going to catch them in no foolery and no mess. You're not, when you sit up there and say something like he went in a meeting unprepared, like, dude, Shedeur Sanders, who's had 6 different coordinators, who has still functioned and went up, leveled up every time we brought somebody new in, and you're gonna tell me he was
every situation.
You're gonna tell me he had on headphones.
So you a dog, your kid's a dog, and dogs gonna always rise to the top. You know what I mean? That's what I believe. You know what I mean? Then we're talking about
it did hurt. The Bible says God uses the foolish things to confound the wise. So it was some foolish stuff that went on, but you know what? That gave them something that they needed. I know.
So that right there, in and of itself, I don't think should spark that much outrage, regardless of what side you're on, because I think Deion handled this well enough. He's speaking from the position of being a father. And if you're a father and someone came out and reported that your son did things contrary to what you raised him to do, like, I think if you boil things down, people always want to try and inflame the situation by saying Shedeur and Shiloh and the Sanders bunch, they're brash and they're bold and they're boisterous and they're whatever, because Deion was such a vocal player back in the day. Even still, I think he even mentioned in this interview, it's like he didn't talk to the receivers. Like, he wasn't a trash talker by any means, but when it came to the press and like letting people know who the best player was, he was going to be that guy. And he wasn't going to be someone who was disrespected and forgot about, because I think especially back in that day, before PFF, before all these advanced statistics that you could put out there to show like how effective a guy is, Deion was a guy who's probably left out of the conversation sometimes because he wasn't being challenged, because that's how locked down he was. They talked about regularly in when the NFL Top 100 first aired, like him and a lot of other people were kind of shocked with how he was ranked. I think he was in the high teens when a lot of people felt it's like you should have been probably a top 10 player all time considering how dominant you were. But a lot of the rationale was like, well, he just wasn't tested. He wasn't thrown at. It'd be a full game where he wasn't even being targeted because he would lock a guy down so much. So I think part of keeping your name in the news cycle, like that's how you build awareness, or at least back in the day, that's how you would have had to gone by it. You can be like a very quiet, under the radar player in the modern day, but the advanced statistics are going to come out and be like, whoa, well, he has like a 92.5 PFF grade. He's the best. That's why I think you're getting guys from smaller markets in terms of like not being a Cowboys player or a 49er or a Steeler or this or that. Like you get the Pat Surtains or Derek Stingley Jr.'s in Houston and Denver. And I'm not saying those are like small franchises or anything. Those are larger, but they're not the marquee, like big five. And that's why a lot of people view those guys that way. It's why I think Denzel Ward has gotten a decent amount of respect, not as much as he deserves, because I think he's so locked down. He just doesn't get the interceptions and whatnot to boost that. But that's the thing. I think if you look back in the day, that was a part of why people needed to be a bit louder, because it's like you got to direct some of the attention back to you when you are playing well enough to deserve being in the conversation there. And just one more example of this. The old linebacker for the Buffalo Bills used to wear the Under Armour with like the Spider-Man stuff on it. I forget what his name is. It's evading me, but he was a part of those Jim Kelly teams that went to 4 straight Super Bowls. And I remember on one of the 30 for 30s or something where he was very vocal and being like, look, I've been one of the best linebackers in the NFL over the past 5 seasons, and I've never been to a Pro Bowl. Like, what's the deal with that? And him advocating for himself wound up getting the eyes towards him to allow him to go to a Pro Bowl. So I think advocating for yourself is a very normal thing. I do not think that Shedeur Sanders really did that to a crazy extent. I think the media circus around him has put his name in the news cycle so much that that is where that's all come from. He's not carrying himself the way Deion did, but the way that the media has reported on it would give you the impression that he's constantly being like me. And sure, you might have individual examples, but it's like you need to make sure that this isn't a confirmation bias. Is he being a cocky douche to the extent that other quarterbacks have been? Like, I look at the way Cam Newton carried himself coming out of Auburn and the reasons why he didn't really sustain beyond being a starter in the NFL was because he was unwilling to not be the best. And that's like a great competitor mentality. But all of that to say, that is what was being placed on Shedeur in the draft process. It's like, he's not going to be willing to be a backup. He's not going to be willing to do this. He's not going to be willing to do that. And I've talked at length about he shouldn't have to be, and no starting quarterback should want to be, or give the sense that they're willing to be a backup. It's like, ultimately, if that thing comes, if that opportunity shows itself and you have to embrace it, are you going to embrace it? I think Shedeur absolutely will. And I don't think that there's any debating that with how he's carried himself through OTAs and rookie minicamp. Even Joe Flacco comes out and says it's like the whole mentor conversation that came up. He doesn't need to be a mentor, and he doesn't need to state that he wants to be or is willing to be, because it will just be twisted as a guy who's not being a competitor in that moment. And it's a double-edged sword. Then if he's not, then he's not being a good veteran. Yada, yada, yada. All this to say, the way that the media spun a lot of the stuff with Shedeur going on was not reflective, I think, of his character or the way that Deion raised his kid. He obviously raised him to be an elite competitor, to be ultra focused, to understand how to navigate the limelight, negative attention, negative press. But I think then when you see the report that he was wearing headphones in the meeting, that he was wearing so much cologne that some of the people in the meeting room had to like open a window, or however it was worded. Like they were very subtle shots at a guy that could definitely be framed any which way. It's like if you were wearing headphones and someone walked in and took them out of respect for that person, and then the person goes and says, oh, when I walked in, he had headphones in. It could easily be framed as a disrespectful thing rather than a respectful move to take your headphones out when somebody walked in. It's like, you're not going to sit there and tell anyone who is moderately informed on the NFL or who has been watching it that a prospect was sitting in a meeting with headphones in. Like, that does not happen. That does not happen with the worst, most problematic, low character prospects. And I seriously doubt that Shedeur Sanders was doing something like that. Then like that whole cologne bit that came out, I remember reading that and I'm like, I do not like cologne. I hate the smell of it. I think it's really like, I like a clean smell and then some deodorant on there to make sure nothing leaks through. I'm not a big cologne guy. I think it grosses me out. But to go out there and comment that anonymously as well and throw that in the mix like it has any bearing whatsoever on your ability to be drafted or be a good quarterback is such a low blow. So that's the other thing people need to understand. It's not just that there were legitimate concerns and Deion was a part of that because he can be very vocal and coaches don't want to answer those things. There were 1000% cheap shots that were mixed into these reports. And the fact that people did it anonymously and didn't attach their name to them is pretty crazy. So I think Deion here saying that it hurt to see some of those things that were in there. Absolutely, they hurt. And he's just being honest. And I don't think that is inflammatory whatsoever. He's not talking about my son should be starting. I know it's only June here. Things could change. I don't think Deion's going to come out there and say any of that stuff. I don't think he would do that to his kid. All he's saying is it hurt that he doesn't believe a lot of the reports because that's not how he raised his son. He raised his son to respect other people and people in positions of authority. He also taught his son to earn respect and demand to be respected by the way he carries himself. So a lot of that seems a little bit crazy to me. Like, we're going to listen to it now, the Jason McIntyre take on what Deion said. I don't think anything Deion said is inflammatory. I don't think it's going to raise questions. It might raise one question or two or three in Kevin Stefanski's next media availability. That'll be like, oh, did you see what Deion said? And they might ask him to go deeper on it. Kevin Stefanski is equipped for those kind of questions. He'll be like, yeah, like blah, blah, blah. And he'll sidestep it and move on. It's really not going to be a big deal. But let's listen to what Jason McIntyre said on this issue.
This, my friends, is why Shedeur Sanders fell in the draft. I thought it was probably 50% Deion, 50% Shedeur. I'm now thinking NFL teams, front offices were just like, no thank you on Shedeur Sanders precisely because of this. Folks, it's the beginning of June, and Deion is already complaining about his son and what went down at the draft. And there are teams that passed on Deion this morning. That's why we didn't want him. Joe Shane and Brian Daboll looking at their owner. I told you, we don't need this crap. And again, I'm not going to challenge what Deion said. It doesn't really matter. Did he wear headphones to a meeting with a team? I don't know. That seems like something weird to make up for a team. But Deion's pushback is, oh, would he wear headphones to a meeting? Well, he either did or didn't. And oh, by the way, this whole he had 6 offensive coordinators. That's not denying what went down at the meeting, him being unprepared. And again, Shedeur has an uphill climb in Cleveland. And I think a lot of it has to do with exactly what Deion's saying on this podcast.
Okay, so we're going to pause it at the halfway point there. Jason McIntyre, for me, just straight up as a broadcaster, I'm really not a fan. As you know, I've talked about, I like Colin Cowherd. I know that's a controversial, inflammatory take considering his hate for Cleveland, even though he might never admit it. We know, we see it, whatever. I like Colin Cowherd. Jason McIntyre never knows when to shut up. That guy is constantly interrupting Cowherd whenever he's talking, trying to interject different things. Like he'll be in the middle of a monologue and he's like, come on, rank your top 5 NFC North quarterbacks. Like just random stuff like that. So with all that, I think the ADD style of Jason McIntyre, he's kind of getting lost within his own argument right here and right now. First of all, there's no drama or complaining in saying that it hurt to see the draft slide and the things that were being said about your son. That is a very normal human thing to say. And the fact that this is getting airtime and that this is something to talk about, and then we're not going to spend time talking about the Caleb Williams drama. Like, I know people are talking about that, so I'm not trying to create a straw man argument and bring that up and be like, no one's talking about it, because people are. But to compare these two, to have a dad who, and I understand he's not on the spotlight, so it's slightly different, but to have a dad who is eagerly campaigning to not have the Bears draft you and then trying to make it so you get equity in the team that drafts you, and to have all of these demands and be this public, it's like, I talked about this. I'm like, that is what I think ultimately a good dad does. They care for their kids. They want the best for them. They try to set them up for success. So I'm not even faulting Caleb Williams' dad in doing what he did. Did they go about it the wrong way? Potentially. Do I think a lot more of that is based on the way that Caleb Williams himself represents himself? It's like, absolutely. Like, you heard Albert Breer and other guys come out and talk about it, that it's like, part of the concern for the Bears with Caleb Williams and them needing him to become a better leader is like, even the way when he gets hit and he slowly comes off the ground and like does not look like he has any dog in him whatsoever. It's like, those are the things that actually matter and that you should be concerned about, because it's how the player carries himself on the field. And ultimately, the off-field stuff has very little impact if you are performing well. And again, all this to say, it's like, that is what good parents do. I think that they should care, like they should know when to shut their mouth. But to say that Deion saying that it hurt to see his son slide 5 rounds when by all accounts people thought he was a first-round pick. And let's not have this revisionist history. I see some people in the comments being like, at best, he's a 7th-round talent and he's going to get cut. It's like, you either have an uncontrollable bias or you've been brainwashed by the media with like the Department of Truth, whatever it's called, in 1984. It's like, it's not true. If you watch the tape, you see a talented player. All the reports you're seeing coming out of training camp is that Shedeur is easily the 2nd best player on the field in terms of the quarterback room. So Jason McIntyre coming out and saying that that is drama is an unbelievably dumb take. That is not complaining. That is speaking earnestly from the heart. He's not demanding that anything be done. He's not saying that it was unfair. He's not saying any of that. He might feel that way, but he's just saying it hurt to see that. That is a completely normal thing. And if a NFL front office and head coaching staff cannot navigate those sorts of questions, then maybe they aren't qualified to be in the positions that they are, especially Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen in New York for the Giants. And I'm getting fired up here, man, because those two guys on their own completely shit the bed with their rebuild that they had going on. They chose Daniel Jones over Saquon Barkley. That is extremely public. Brian Daboll chewing out Daniel Jones on the sidelines after throwing an interception. I understand coaches get mad. It's completely justified to yell. I'm not one of those people from the cupcake generation that the boomers like to try and point out. Believe me, I had my fair share of yelling in football and practice. It's like, that has not left. This idea that players are soft now is completely asinine. It's like, yes, have things changed to the extent that we're not going to play bull in the ring in 90-degree heat and keep bashing our heads together? It's like, yeah, that has changed. The nature of football and tough coaching has not. And everyone who's made it to the next level has experienced tough coaching. All that being said, Brian Daboll is a frustrated little guy and clearly has some ego to him and clearly feels the heat and the pressure and has his own biases inherently built into the way that he coaches and the way that he evaluates players. And there's no doubt in my mind that they felt threatened by a guy like Shedeur. It was also very public that Shedeur wanted to go to the Giants. He wore the Giants cleats. He did all these things signifying that he wanted to be a part of that team. You're going to tell me that that guy wasn't on his best behavior? And I don't doubt that the whole portion of them having the mistake in the install was fair. Like, I don't think that that was a lie. I think that that probably did happen. I think that they did probably insert something that wasn't real and that, or sorry, that was false, and that they wanted Shedeur to catch and he didn't. And they probably did have some sort of a tense exchange within that. But that right there, I don't think should be a make or break moment on whether or not you're going to take a player. If you actually believe in them and their on-field tape consistently shows that they have the talent to be that level of a player. And I don't know, Jackson Dart, to me, I think that that guy has some character concerns. I think the way that, and I don't mean character in terms of like he's a bad guy off the field. I just think in the way he carries himself, him going out partying the night before a game on Halloween, like being photographed, being out, all that kind of stuff. And he had a ton of backlash from Ole Miss. He winds up breaking some record the next day for like yards thrown in a game for a specific opponent or something to that effect. But he had a very good game. So it ultimately didn't matter. But the fact is, he still did that thing that created controversy. And if he had played bad, it would have been really bad. And that would have been an enormous knock against that type of player in terms of them becoming a first-round prospect. So we can cherry pick and we can pick and choose on these things that are character concerns, that are viewed as complaining, as a father or a coach whining. Let's not ignore what has been consistently put on tape by the teams who passed on Shedeur. Like the Giants. They chose Daniel Jones over Saquon Barkley. Why should we trust that judgment? Why should we trust Joe Shane? If we look at the Saints, they have not been relevant since Drew Brees and Sean Payton. They went with Dennis Allen, who was a joke of a head coach. And then they draft Tyler Shuck, the 25-year-old, 7-year college quarterback who backed up Justin Herbert for 2 years. Why should we trust that judgment? Then the Steelers. And we're not here to argue about the legend of the Steelers. I know I'm a Browns fan. I'm not talking about that. I publicly stated that I completely respect the Steelers franchise because of what they have accomplished as a team throughout their life as an organization. What have they been since Big Ben? What have they been? They've been a middling team that plays great defense, gets lucky, creates the most unbelievable defensive turnovers that turn into touchdowns and they win a game by 2 points, or great special teams. They have been a ghost on offense. They have the least touchdowns scored, I think, in the past 3 seasons, or they're second to only like Tennessee. It's something crazy. They are a shell of what they used to be offensively. So why should we trust them when it comes to making a judgment call on a quarterback, on a player? Why should we do that? They also have other things in mind, like signing Aaron Rodgers. But even still, you're going to sacrifice the future of your team for Aaron Rodgers, not drafting a very talented young quarterback who clearly gelled well with the head coach. It's like, guys, Aaron Rodgers creates drama every single place he goes. And if you're going to sit there and tell me that they didn't want Shedeur Sanders because they're worried about what drama he might cause, we're not talking about like the play aspect. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers at this point, even at age 40, is a better NFL quarterback than Shedeur Sanders. But if we're talking about the reasons for him sliding is Deion, and that's what it is, because now we've seen it shift. Jason McIntyre is talking about this is why teams pass. Deion, he's being vocal, he's being loud. That's what we're talking about. That's the reason why now. Okay, what about what Aaron Rodgers brings to you in terms of negative press and how he's prickly with his head coaches and with the media and is constantly creating issues and throwing coordinators under the bus and teammates under the bus and not working well with young players? So what are we talking about here? We're picking and choosing, and they're using Shedeur's name, like Jason McIntyre is using Shedeur's name because him and Deion are going to get you clicks. And their takes do not make sense, and when you try and measure them up with any form of logic, they fall totally flat. All right, now let's just finish with his last minute of argumentation here.
So Kevin Stefanski's going to show up at OTAs this week, and he's not going to get asked about Hey, how's Myles Garrett looking and the defense? What's up with Nick Chubb? Have you made a decision? How about the wide receiver room? You know, a lot of change there. Any quarterback update. It's not going to be any of that.
Okay, first of all, Myles Garrett wasn't at OTA, so they wouldn't know how he's looking. Second, they have 3 or 4 running backs on the roster. Nick Chubb probably isn't coming back. Someone is still going to ask that, even though that's fact. So another poor argument there. The wide receiver room, so much change. What change has been going on? It's still Jerry Jeudy. It's still Cedric Tillman. They brought in Deontay Johnson. He wasn't at OTAs. It's like straw men everywhere you could see. Let's keep going, though.
It's going to be. So Deion Sanders said this, and now you're getting questions about your 4th string quarterback in June. And folks, it ain't going to end here. This is going to continue. Anytime Deion steps in front of a microphone, nobody cares about the Colorado Buffaloes right now. Travis Hunter's in the NFL. Shedeur's gone. You know what they're going to ask Deion? Hey, you know, Kenny Pickett threw 3 picks in a preseason game. Deion, your thoughts? And Deion, who has a history of talking, that's what made him famous. That's why it's prime time. You think he's going to be able to stand down and pull back?
Okay, so once again, according to Jason McIntyre, what made Deion famous was that he talks. It's not that he's the best cover corner, the most shut down player, one of the most dynamic athletes in NFL history, who also played on offense and defense and played in the MLB for years. It's like, what are you talking about? Talking is what made him famous. Also, you know what happens? You know what Deion wants? To not keep living. Like, he doesn't want to live in the shadow of his children in their NFL journey. Yeah, he'll probably comment on something when his kid gets a chance. If he's asked about Kenny Pickett throwing interceptions, you know what Deion's going to say? He's going to say, you know what? That's up to the Browns organization. It's their decision, but I know my son's going to be ready. That would probably be the extent of what he says when he comments on that. You know what he's not going to do? Endlessly answer questions about a kid, even though it's his own, who's not on his football team anymore. He's not. People saying no one cares about the Colorado Buffaloes. What about the local media and press whose job is to cover the team? Like, what are we talking about here, man? So it's just really crazy. We're going to, like, these people in the media are going to cherry pick these little moments to try and fully paint a picture of a person who simply said that it hurt and that he doesn't necessarily believe that his kid was wearing headphones and that he wasn't prepared. That is completely fair. There's nothing controversial about that. This is in one ear, out of the other. The only thing that's going to remain in the news cycle are the people with the poor argumentation who are trying to accuse someone of an outlandish statement because they obviously support their kid and said that it hurt to see them slide and to see all the lies, quote unquote, that were being said about his child. That's completely rational. That is completely normal. It is not a big deal. So, I mean, it's good for us to talk about, keep bringing this out. We're going to keep breaking those arguments down and showing you how invalid they are. But that's all I got to say about that. Jason McIntyre, we don't need you, buddy. However, I will say, just touching on this, I do think it is very exciting to see how much Shedeur is embracing this role. Him coming out saying, I ask Joe Flacco every day what he needs. I try and offer to reorganize his locker. Joe Flacco comes out and says, Shedeur's a funny kid. He makes me smile. And that's a great thing to see. He's embracing his position. He's competing, trusting the process. And every time you look on Twitter, you're seeing a guy who's dropping dimes, who's doing well. And it's very exciting. As a Browns fan, my whole life, I was born in 95. I was born a few days after the Browns' last game before they were ripped out and went to Baltimore. It wasn't until 99. I really started watching the Browns around 05, 06, 07 when they had that 10-6 season. And there's just never been a quarterback. There's never been a situation in my lifetime, even with Baker Mayfield, where I was like, I think we have our guy. And I know we have not seen a single snap on an actual field. We haven't seen anything like that, but there's just this feeling, and it's infectious. And this is the whole Shedeur mob is like preaching this. I'm not going off of that. I'm not going off the hype. I'm just the way that he carries himself, the calmness, the touch, all those things that we saw on film when we did our film breakdown. Make sure you check that out on the channel, by the way. It just feels like this could be it. And it's very exciting. Again, this take could change 100 times between now and training camp in week 1. We're just saying it's an exciting time. It's a lot of speculation, but that's just the way I'm feeling right now. Check back in next week to see if it's any different. With that being said, though, if we're talking about quarterbacks, let's talk about what Zac Jackson said. So Zac Jackson, I think he was on Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show or another podcast, and I'm so sorry if I'm getting it wrong. If it makes you feel any better, nobody knows this one. Gotcha. Everybody knows this podcast. All right. So Zac Jackson comes out. He's a writer for The Athletic. He says, Dillon Gabriel does not look like an NFL quarterback to me. Like 0%. I just don't think any other team was taking him in the top 100 or even the top 150. If I am wrong and the Cleveland Browns have their quarterback, that would be great. One of these years, I would love to cover a normal franchise and a rookie quarterback that sticks around for more than 6 to 18 months. But if it's not Dillon Gabriel, if it is Dillon Gabriel, I will be beyond shocked. I think that's a bit of a leap, and this is yet another one of those situations where if we have to temper our expectations with Shedeur, which we absolutely do, because this is a new level of football that he has never competed at before and has still not competed in a live game scenario, we have to do the same thing for Dillon Gabriel. Sometimes that adjustment takes a little bit longer, without a doubt. However, if we were being purely honest, if we look at the height, if we look at the system he was coming from Oregon, it seemed like a classic case of a guy who plays at a great program, who's a great college quarterback, but is not going to translate. I think you could say the same thing about Will Howard, Quinn Ewers, and I don't even think Quinn Ewers was a great college quarterback necessarily. But we see this happen every single year. Guys are a product of a great system, great offensive line, the nation's best offensive weapons, receivers, running backs, tight ends. Dillon Gabriel had all of that, played for Dan Lanning. Oregon was the best team in the country for the majority of the season. Now, when you get placed behind a bad offensive line with a questionable receivers room in terms of top tier NFL talent, playing against one of the better defenses in team periods when everyone is there and everyone's participating, which hasn't even been the case yet, you could see how those people might struggle. Then you put Shedeur in that situation, who played behind a bad offensive line with zero run game, no tight ends. You can see why they might be thriving. So it could just be different periods. And this is the thing that we have to stay open to. I don't think that this will happen, but this very well could. And we can't entrench ourselves too deep into one position of belief. Dillon Gabriel might wind up adjusting, and he could absolutely come out there and be the guy. But the fact that Zac Jackson, who's clearly been around Browns practice a lot, he has seen a ton of quarterbacks come in and out over the just past 5 years. So many, countless dudes. You probably have a pretty good barometer of whether or not a guy is going to stick. And it just seems to be that Dillon Gabriel isn't going to be that guy. When he was drafted, to me, I'm like, my take, and I still stand by this, he is a more athletic Case Keenum. And Case Keenum was another guy who was one of the best college quarterbacks in the history of the NCAA in terms of productivity. However, when he gets to the NFL, it's a bit of a different scenario. You're playing against NFL teams. It all is going to come down to your production, how well you can command an offense, and really embracing being a backup. Those are the guys who have to embrace being a backup, because that's probably the highest level you're ever going to reach. However, within that, you can be an amazing spot starter and you can go on runs. Case Keenum went to an NFC championship. Case Keenum, when he played for the Browns back in the day, had some very good games. Look no further than Broncos-Browns in 2022. Case Keenum can absolutely step in and be an effective quarterback, and he's an extremely valuable backup. I think that's what Dillon Gabriel can be. So I think to say that he doesn't look like an NFL quarterback He absolutely doesn't look like an NFL quarterback. He is not above 6 feet. He's a little squatty and he's left-handed. That is 3 things working against you. However, to say that you can't find a way to have him on your team and be a contributor in terms of being a very valuable backup and a guy who can step in and execute the offense when asked, I think we're getting a little bit too far and it is too early to make those calls. However, it's very interesting to see a reputable person come out and say something like that. And I think ultimately, if Shedeur hits, it's not going to matter. If neither of these guys hit, that 3rd round pick is going to be looked at as extremely controversial and a mark against Andrew Berry, who otherwise I think had a very good draft. So with that being said, let's talk about the general makeup of this Browns roster right now. Excuse the stuttering Taco Bell bell right there. But PFF, I bring this up because PFF, Pro Football Focus, who many people feel some type of way about, other people view it as, gospel. They come out and they release their top rosters in the NFL, ranking everyone from 1 to 32. The Eagles were number 1, not surprising. And guess who number 32 was? The Cleveland Browns. This is one of 2 things. It's either clickbait to inflame a fan base who's been injected with a lot of new fans, and they know that they're going to get a lot of traction with people responding and refuting this, or it's a complete oversight and bias because the Browns is the Browns. That's the way a lot of people, even in the media, view Cleveland. I dove into all this, ran the roster through Gemini, ChatGPT, all that, because I don't have the time to do all the calculations. I'm also very bad at math. And what it revealed, though, was that if you were actually going based on the grades of each individual player, and that's the way PFF works. If you don't know, they use advanced metrics, statistics to give players a grade based on every snap that they take. So for example, Myles Garrett is like a 95.5 PFF grade, not because he gets the most sacks in the league, because he was second in the league in sacks with 14 last year. Trey Hendrickson was first with 17.5, but Myles Garrett is the better player because his pressure rate is higher, because he gets double teamed more often. They factor all these additional advanced metrics in there, so you're getting a better idea of how productive a player is beyond just making the box score. So it's good. But when they try and implement it in the scenario of ranking rosters, they're obviously overlooking something, because with the Philadelphia Eagles, they have a calculated average player grade of 75.07. That still puts them at number 1, regardless of how it's viewed. Then with the Ravens, they're the 2nd ranked in their article, and it works out when you actually run the math. They're 75.06. So that absolutely makes sense. Then the Detroit Lions were ranked number 3 with a 75.06 grade. So tied, it makes sense. They're at the top of the league. But then the Kansas City Chiefs have a 70.68 grade. So their calculated rank based on average grade should put them at number 19. However, they're ranked at number 4 because they have Pat Mahomes, and that's an X factor thing that you can't really overlook. So all that to show, sometimes they're practicing the nuance within that ranking. Other times they're specifically using the grades. And this goes on over and over and over. And if we look at where the Browns rank, they are right around that 1920 mark with a 69.88 grade total. And it's, there's other teams ranked below them, like the Carolina Panthers with a 66.59 grade, the Dallas Cowboys with a 63.75 grade. There's many other examples of this. I'm not going to read them all off to you, but it's showing immediately. It's like, well, based on your methodology and the grades that you've given and the way that you're weighting certain positions compared to others, it's like the Browns do not have the worst roster in the league. I understand. The quarterback position isn't quite ironed out, to say the least. But Joe Flacco starting is still better than a lot of NFL team starters at this point, especially unproven rookies who are going to step in this year and try and make an impact. Then they rank the player to watch is Quinshaw Judkins. It's like, well, what about Dylan Sampson, the leading rusher from the SEC last year? He's probably going to have an impact. What about Harold Fannin, who is coming off of the top ranked PFF season by any college player with a 95 point something grade, broke the record for yards and catches for an FBS player as a tight end. It's like, that's significant. That should be an injection. That's going to make your team better. What about Jerry Jeudy, who just had his best season as an NFL player last year? What about Cedric Tillman, who was one of the most productive receivers for like a 5-game stretch? And I understand that that's a stretch, but I'm just saying, when you compare those moments and what you can logically assume people are going to improve on in a follow-up season should be considered within this. And then too, look at the coaching. The coaching has improved. Tommy Rees coming in. It's going to be a return to Kevin Stefanski's system, which has produced a lot higher offensive output and better grades. Look at Andy Dickerson is gone. They have a new offensive line coach. That is going to improve things. A couple of years ago, this was one of the best graded offensive lines in the league. It is going to get better based on that. But then just looking at the defensive side of the ball, you have a top 3 cover corner in Denzel Ward. You have Myles Garrett, who's the best player in football. You have Mike Hall Jr. coming off of his injury, who was really starting to elevate and become a very good player. Isaiah McGuire, who had a huge leap last year. Alex Wright, who's coming back from a torn triceps, who was one of the top-ranked pass rushers for that few game stretch that he started. He was making leaps. Mason Graham, who's one of the highest-rated D tackles. Jordan Hicks, who had a great year. It's like you keep listing all of these players. And when you stack it up against other teams across the league, no one else has a Myles Garrett. No one, like the Cowboys don't have 2 running backs like Judkins and Sampson. Teams aren't going to have 2 solid tight ends the way the Browns do. When you look at this beyond their methodology, you can see the flawed approach. And I think a lot of it is just to inflame and get some sort of response, but it's just frustrating because people wind up looking at that as gospel, where it's like, oh, this team has a bad roster. And that's all the better. I don't think NFL teams are actually viewing the Browns as having the 32nd worst roster, but just some of their write-up. It's just lazy reporting. It's lazy research. This is what they wind up saying. So their biggest weakness in 2024, the entire offense. The Browns' 2024 offense was hard to watch. The group ranked dead last in PFF grade, 62.1, and EPA per play. Cleveland still has no clear answer at quarterback, arguably the worst receiving corps in the league, and an aging offensive line that earned the 4th worst PFF grade in 2024. It's hard to get much worse, but the Browns' offense still has a bleak outlook for 2025. So that is really... Some of those things are true, but to just conclude that it's like, oh, it'll keep being bad and that coaching changes don't matter and the new rookies you brought in don't matter is a little wild. Like, I agree. The offensive line is getting old. Joel Bitonio in specific. Wyatt Teller still has a couple years left. Posich, young. Conklin, young enough. DeJuan Jones, if he recovers from his injury, is going to continue to ascend as a tackle in this league. Zach Zinter has made big strides in this offseason, apparently. And then Luke Weipler is another guy. So you have these young pieces who you can inject in. And if they make a good jump with a better offensive line coach, which they clearly will have now that Andy Dickerson is gone, this team's going to be better. So there's no projection whatsoever other than being like, well, they're bad this year or last year, so they're going to be bad this year. It doesn't really make sense. Also, to call the Browns saying that they have one of the worst receiving corps in the NFL is just so disrespectful to Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku. And then these young guys, Harold Fannin Jr. It's like, I get that your 2 and 3 aren't that strong, but collectively as a passing attack, if you have a quarterback who's actually delivering the ball accurately and consistently, that's a good passing attack. Look at what they did with Jameis Winston. That's all the proof that you need that these guys can ascend, like what we saw from Cedric Tillman over that period. All right, and to finish on one final thing, we're going back to Shedeur real quick. And this isn't the Shedeur podcast. It's just, again, this is the best thing to talk about currently while we're waiting for the season to actually start. People being like, are they actually going to give Shedeur a chance? Are they going to actually give him a chance? And this whole notion that he isn't a lock to make the team. We talked about this last year. It is crazy to be talking like that. He's going to make the team. Kenny Pickett is going to get cut or traded before training camp ends or before training camp or whatever. He is going to get a fair shot. Why do you think that this team with this coaching staff and this front office isn't hell-bent on finding their answer at quarterback? And why do you think that they are not going to adjust the reps, the play time in the preseason, and all this based on who's giving them the best look? The cream is going to rise to the top. This whole worry that he isn't going to get the chance. Like I just saw Tony Rizzo or Grossi. What I cannot differentiate those two. They're worried that he's not necessarily going to get a fair shot. It's just complete horse pucky, my friend. Everyone is going to get their shot, and then you're going to see certain guys start to pull away and get more opportunities as this preseason goes on. It's just the way that it's going to work. So don't buy into this. He's going to make the team. Gabriel's going to make the team. Flacco's going to start the season. And that's just the way it's going to be. So with all that being said, my people, we're going to be getting out of here. We're going to have more stuff coming soon. We got the Harold Fannin Jr. film study up. We also have the Shedeur that we posted. Going to do with Mason Graham, Schlesinger, both running backs. And very excited to get into those and give you guys some high quality stuff. So make sure you subscribe. If you want to listen to these on the go, subscribe to the audio only feed below. You can listen on iTunes, Spotify, whatever podcast platform you use. You don't have to go to YouTube just to watch it. So be sure to check that out. If you want to buy one of these lovely Pumpkinhead shirts, the link is below at pumpkinhead.shop. Support. I've designed these myself, so we appreciate it. And a lot of big things coming soon. So we will see you guys soon.